So I know we kind of recap this every time, but we get new faces every time, and so it's important that you understand it. The book of Genesis, Coda, who wrote it? Moses wrote the book of Genesis. Who did he write it to? You know, Tyler? The Israelites, yeah. He's leading people out of Egypt. Remember on the Exodus, he's leading people out of Egypt, and they're going to the Promised Land. They're going to spend 40 years in the wilderness. And so Moses is preaching the book of Genesis to them. So, on one sense, do we ask, is Genesis history? And we can say yes, in the sense that it's historically accurate. But the purpose of the book of Genesis is not just to enlighten you to what went on years ago. The purpose of the book of Genesis is Moses' attempt to preach the gospel to his congregation. So that's what's going to take place in Genesis. And as we've said, Moses is using a unique technique. He is preaching the gospel through people, okay? He's giving us stories through people, major players in the book. First major player, Melody, you remember? Well, Melody, we've gone over this 500 times. If you hadn't eaten 2 brownies, you might have remembered.
I didn't eat 2, I ate exactly.
Look, don't pass the buck, okay? Just own what you did. So, first player in the book of Genesis. Caleb, who's the first major player in the book of Genesis? You've read Genesis, right? Adam, yeah. So what do we learn from Adam? You know about Adam. I'm saving you from getting in trouble by talking to your brother too much. So,
He's the first person to sin.
okay, he sinned. Melody, do you remember what he did? He ate the fruit. Yeah, okay. Very good. See, you're remembering. Now it's all coming back to you. So he sinned. And so from Adam we learn sin. And sin brings what? Death. Step 1 of the gospel. Sin brings death. You learn that from Adam. You read Adam's lineage in Genesis 5, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. That's the first major point Moses makes to the children of Israel. Sin will kill you. Second major player, major event that takes place in the book of Genesis. Second major player, Zach, Noah. What do you know about Noah, Cody? You know about Noah? The flood. So sin brings judgment. God killed the whole world, right? That's what sin brings. It's a global killer. The only people he saves are Noah and his family. So sin brings death and judgment. It's the story of the gospel laid out for you. Third major player in the book of Genesis, Abigail. Abraham. What do we learn from Abraham? How was Abraham saved? Yeah, you see that. God chooses Abraham when he's not worthy. God protects and delivers Abraham over and over, even from his own sinful inclinations. Ultimately, Genesis 15, Abraham believes God, and God credits righteousness to him. So he's saved by grace through faith. It answers the question, what does man do with his sin problem? And the answer is, you trust in God, and he will justify sinners. And so you've seen now how this story's been working out. And there's a lot more that went on in Abraham's life that we're not going to rehash. Another important aspect of Genesis, for those who hadn't been with us, all throughout the book of Genesis, you see Jesus. He's everywhere in the book. Where have you seen Jesus so far in the book of Genesis, somebody? I won't ask Melody because she wasn't here for the first part, right? What? Okay, when Adam and Eve sinned, they were in the garden, they were naked. The Bible says that God clothed them in animal skins. He's clothing them in their shame. An innocent lamb, innocent animal, whatever it was God killed, he killed it, shed its blood so that Adam and Eve could be clothed. That's a picture of Jesus. A sinless, righteous animal dying in the stead of sinners. Jesus clothes us in his righteousness. We are shielded from the wrath of God. That's a picture of Jesus right in the book of Genesis. Where else you see him, Coda? He's the ark. Peter tells us that. That ark that carried Noah through the judgment, that's Jesus. He's the one that carries us through the wrath of God. If we're in him, we are delivered. Where else you see Jesus in Genesis, Zach? Creation. He's the creator. We find that out in Colossians. We find it out in John. All things came into being through him. Apart from him, nothing came into being that came into being. That's Jesus. He's the creator. Where else you see Jesus in the book of Genesis? Anybody got him another one? You got him one, Abigail? What? Oh, Melchizedek, right. When Abraham comes back from rescuing Lot, there's this priest here. He's a priest and a king. Abraham gives him 1/10 of all, and Melchizedek blesses Abraham. We find out in Psalm 110 that he is a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. That's Jesus. He's a picture of Christ. There's more. Anybody else see Jesus in Genesis? What ram? Okay, when Abraham goes up to sacrifice his son Isaac, and he's got him on the altar and he's about to kill him, and God says, wait, don't kill your son. Now I know that you fear God. And Abraham looks and there's a ram caught in the thicket. That ram is a picture of Jesus, a substitutionary sacrifice. In fact, Abraham named that place. I'll give you 1,000 Bible points if you know what Abraham named that place. Nobody wants 1,000. What? The Lord provides. That's right.
I was like, maybe you
Don't take credit now if you don't know it. Just acknowledge your sister loves the Bible more than you do. That's all you have to do. So, the Lord provides. Who provided the sacrifice? God did, right? That's the gospel completely. We don't provide the sacrifice. We don't provide the atonement. We don't do anything that warrants God's salvation. He provides all that is needed. That's a picture of Christ. You see him all throughout the book of Genesis. Well, you're going to see him again tonight. So now we come to Genesis 32, and now we're in the middle of the fourth major player in the book of Genesis, and we've been with him for a while. We had Adam taught us sin, Noah taught us judgment, Abraham taught us salvation, and now we're on to Jacob. And Jacob teaches us sanctification. Anybody remember what sanctification is? All right, God's making you like Jesus? Yeah, it's that process of basically he has declared you righteous. Now he is working that out in you. He is making you righteous. He is creating you into the image of the one whom created you. By the way, this is all gospel. When Adam was created, we found out that Adam was created how? Do you remember the announcement God made about Adam when he created man? Okay, Adam was made in the image of God. That's what you read. Mankind is made in the image of God. Does that mean that God looks just like Quincy? No, or Caleb, or Tyler, or me, right? That didn't mean that Adam looked exactly like God. This was D now a couple years ago, so if you're remembering this, you're doing well. What does it mean that Adam was made in the image of God? What? You're going to have to be louder. Leo's deaf.
Holy and perfect.
Holy and perfect, no.
Good.
What? He was made good, that's true. Adam was God's representative. Adam was God's authority. He was told to rule over creation. He was told to subdue it. And so Adam bears the image of God in the sense that he carries God's authority to all of creation. When creation wanted to know who is God, what's God like, where were they supposed to look? Adam. Adam was the image bearer. But sin came, and Adam's image was distorted. It was marred. It's like when you go to a carnival and you look in one of those funny mirrors and you're all, I think mine got a funny mirror at the house. It makes me look bloated in the middle usually. Don't laugh, Melody. So, and you get an image and you can kind of see it, but it's distorted. You can't really see it. It's like a Picasso painting. Have you ever seen a Picasso painting? You put the nose over here and an eye down here, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. That's what happened. Mankind still bears the image of God, but it's a distorted image. It's a fallen image. It's a marred image until Jesus shows up. And Jesus is the very image of the invisible God in Colossians. So Jesus shows us this God that we've never fully comprehended. But when Jesus shows up, he is the new Adam. And he shows us what God is. We see God now through the person of Jesus. And the process of sanctification then is that process of us being conformed into the image of his Son. So he's restoring that fallen image from Adam. He's restoring that true image of God in us. We're still distorted, we're still fallen, we're still corrupt, but through the process of sanctification, God is moving us daily more and more and more like Christ, that we would bear the image of the heavenly. That's the whole idea. Ultimately, we're with God and will be glorified and bear his image completely. So Jacob is on this process of being sanctified. Now, again, if you weren't with us, who is Jacob? You know who Jacob was, Cody? You know who Jacob was? Caleb, do you know? You can bail him out and be the hero of the night. He had a brother. Yeah, Jacob and Esau, right? Who was their daddy? Isaac was their dad, right? So there's two brothers. They're twins, right? They're born, and Jacob was the younger, but what was unique about that relationship between Jacob and Esau? God chose Jacob over Esau, that's right, because he can. That's called sovereign election. You don't have to like it. It's all over everywhere in the Bible. God chooses whom he chooses, and we don't get to argue. Paul bears that out in Romans 9. But he chooses Jacob, even though Jacob's the younger, and says Jacob will be the one that gets blessed. Jacob will be the one that gets the inheritance. It's all going to be Jacob. Esau's born first. Well, you remember the stories of Jacob. You remember how he deceives his brother for the birthright out for a bowl of pea soup. You remember how he dresses up like Esau to get the blessing, right? And then after that happens, Jacob has to flee because Esau wants to kill him. And he goes back to the homeland of his mother, which is a place called Paddan Aram, and that's where his uncle Laban lives. And Jacob goes back to Paddan Aram, and remember, he's so full of self-confidence, and he's so mighty and powerful, he can just do anything he wants. And so what are some of the things we saw Jacob do? You remember, Tyler? Have you tried this since? You remember when he wanted a girl, you remember what he did? Do what? He got it. Yeah, when he wants a girl, he gets a girl. That's right. It can't be that hard, can it? Okay. That's a good point. He goes to the well, remember, and there's all these flocks of sheep, and they're not watering the sheep, and Jacob's like, shouldn't be here right now. It's not time to water sheep. And what did the herdsman tell him? Yeah, we got to get everybody here to move the stone. It's like, oh, it makes sense. Heavy stone needs a bunch of people. But then Rachel shows up. And remember, Jacob, yeah, and Jasmine, Cody's probably done this for you, walks up there and goes, I'll move the stone, watch me, right? And so Jacob grabs a stone and moves it just to be real impressive to Rachel. And then what's he do? He kisses her. Yeah, just grabs her and kisses her. It's just like a Hallmark movie. And so he kisses her and says, I'm going to marry this girl. And he goes home to Laban and says, I want to marry your daughter. And I'll work 7 years to marry your daughter. And it all sounds good. And Jacob's got life figured out. I mean, he's got it by the tail. He's smart. He's cunning. He's figured it out. He's got the woman he wants. He knows what he's doing. Until the wedding night. And something happens on the wedding night. You remember this melody? Ask Abigail, she'll tell you. You don't want to ask Abigail, I know. I don't blame you. Taylor, you remember?
Laban disguises her sister, he says she has no sparkle in her eye.
That's right. So he disguises the older sister, Leah, dresses her up like Rachel, sends her down the aisle. Dum, dum, da, dum. You know, they go in, and he spends the night with Leah. And he wakes up the next morning, he's going to give his beautiful little thing a kiss, and he whips open the veil, and right? It's not Rachel. It's Leah. And he comes out and says, you tricked me, right? What were you doing? What were you thinking? You remember this? It's the same thing he did to his dad. Remember? Dressed up like his brother. God's got a sense of humor like that. And so he says, hey, you tricked me. And he said, well, sorry, I always marry the older off first. And so Jacob has to work 7 more years to get Rachel. And then we found out over the course of time that Laban is a shyster. He keeps tricking Jacob. He keeps cheating Jacob. Jacob can't get ahead. He's worked off his 14 years. He just can't get ahead. Laban is a step ahead of him every way, and Jacob acknowledges that and says, man, every single time I've tried to enter a deal with you, you cheat me, you wrong me, you outsmart me. And the reason God has allowed that in Jacob's life is why? God is breaking Jacob down. You cannot be self-reliant and believe the gospel. You have to be broken first. Blessed are the poor in spirit, Jesus said, for theirs alone is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for theirs alone is the kingdom of heaven. And so God has to break all that pride in Jacob. Laban is a great university for Jacob. Laban breaks him day in and day out, and Jacob is finally now fleeing Laban as a broken man, and Laban would have conquered him again, but God warned Laban not to. So now Jacob is returning back to the land of Canaan. And he's escaped from Laban, but he's a pretty well broken man, narrowly completely broken. He's got one more major hurdle that he's got to face. He's coming back home, and he gets to the river, and he's going to cross that river and go into the land of Canaan. But who do you think is ready to meet Jacob? Esau. And what did Esau say about Jacob? Next time I see him, I'm going to kill him. He stole my blessing. He stole my birthright. I'm going to kill him. And so Jacob is headed home. We're going to see now in chapter 32 the conclusion or the graduation of Jacob. He's about to be concluded in his sanctification process. So somebody read verses 1 and 2 of Genesis 32.
Now as Jacob went on his way, the angel of God met him. Jacob said when he saw that this is God's camp, so he named that place Hanai.
Just say it fast and nobody knows the difference, right? All right, so Jacob's coming back, and notice now, this is the third time this has happened. The first time Jacob catches a vision is when he was leaving Canaan, and God, remember, showed him the ladder from heaven and said, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to bring you back. The next time is when God shows him that vision of the spotted and striped sheep, and I'm going to bless you and I'm going to prosper you. This is the third time now Jacob sees a vision, and this time he sees the angels of God. And Jacob, when he sees the angels of God, what does he say? This is what? This is God's camp. That's a military term that he's using. So what Jacob says is, I have seen God's army. You hear of a guardian angel? Jacob's got a guardian army. God has shown up with his army to defend Jacob and escort him back into the land of Canaan. This is a remarkable thing. If anything should qualm Jacob's fear, it should be this. Wow, God showed up with his army to escort me home. All of the angel army. Chris Tomlin sings that song, God of Angel Armies, right? You've heard that? This is it. This is the angelic army of God. Jacob sees them. They're here on Jacob's behalf to escort him. It's a pretty remarkable scene. Now, we move from there, and we know that Jacob's processing what's coming. So look at verse 3. Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He also commanded them, saying, Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight. The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he's coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. For he said, If Esau comes to one and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape. So Jacob gets to the river, and he sends a messenger ahead, and the message is to Esau what? What's the message? Well, no, the message Jacob sends to Esau. Been away and I'm coming back, and what else? I'm really prosperous. I've got a lot of stuff. Oxen, donkeys, flocks, servants. And the whole objective there is I want to make peace with you, Esau. I'm coming home and I want to make peace. I realize we left on bad terms. I realize that I cheated you out of some stuff. I just want you to know I'm a wealthy man. I'm very capable of making peace. And I want to come home and I want to make peace. And this is not a bad decision by Jacob. Romans 12 tells you, so far as it is possible, live at peace with all men. Proverbs says a gentle answer turns away wrath. Do everything you can to subdue that. And so Jacob tries. The only problem is he gets word back that what? Now what? Esau's coming. And what's particularly scary about Esau coming? He got 400 men with him. And Jacob is afraid. And so the first thing he does is he splits everything he has into 2 groups with what thought? That's right. If he attacks that one, they'll escape. If he attacks this one, they'll escape. I mean, Jacob's not very optimistic. So Jacob does what you ought to do when you find out you're in danger. You find out God has an angelic army to protect you. What should you do if you're Jacob? What should you do? Pray. Yeah, that makes sense. So, verse 9. Somebody read 9 through 12. Okay. And if you read that, that's a great prayer. Notice how Jacob bookends his prayer with the word of God. In verse 9, God, Abraham, God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, you said to me, return to your country and to your relatives and I'll prosper you. I'm just doing what you said. Look down in verse 12. You said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. This is a great prayer. God, I'm coming to you based on what you have said, what you have promised. I'm coming in obedience. I'm coming to you. Notice his humility in verse 10. It's great. I'm unworthy of all the loving kindness and the faithfulness you've shown me. I came with a staff only, and now I've become 2 companies. But God, here's the deal. Esau's coming. He's got 400 men, and I want you to deliver me. I want you to save me. Get this angelic army, surround me, whatever it takes, but deliver me from Esau. I'm afraid of him. I don't just think he'll kill me. I think he'll kill the mothers. I think he'll kill the children. And so, God, I need you to protect me. That's a great prayer. I mean, Jacob's doing well. You can see he's recognized God at work in his life. He's recognized God as a source of deliverance. He's coming to God and asking for deliverance. But then we get just a glimpse of the old Jacob showing up. Verse 13. So he spent the night there. Then he selected from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels. Have you ever milked a camel? I never ever thought about milking a camel. And their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on before me and put a space between droves. He commanded the one in front, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going, and to whom do these animals in front of you belong, you shall say, these belong to your servant Jacob. It's a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he also is behind us. Then he commanded also the second and the third, and all those who followed the drove, saying, after this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face, perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on before him, while he himself spent that night in the camp. So Jacob now, typical Jacob, I have a plan, right? I asked God to deliver, but I have a plan. And his plan is what? Give him presents. He breaks them up into like 5 waves of presents. Show him what's behind door number 1, Bob, right? And wait, there's more. And wait, there's more. So that's the idea. I'm going to try to win him over. That's my plan. Maybe he'll accept the presents. Maybe he'll accept me. So you have this Jacob, whom God has showed up to protect him, but Jacob is still a little bit dependent on his own ability. He's got a plan. I know how to deal with Esau. I've been dealing with Esau my whole life. I think I can appease him. I'm going to buy him off. I think this will work. And so he's working this plan out. He was doing great in the prayer, but you see senses of that old Jacob trying to take over again. And then we get to the part of the story that Jacob is most famous for in his life. Verse 22. Now he arose that same night and took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. Then Jacob was left alone. All right, so Jacob sends his wife and his kids all kind of across this little fork of the Jordan. He sends them across, and he stays over here by himself. And we read this about Jacob in verse 24. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. You ever hear that story about Jacob wrestling with God? You've heard this, right? And it says, when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Now let's stop there for a second. Anybody ever heard this story before about Jacob wrestling with God? And anytime people talk about the story of Jacob wrestling with God, you may have an idea. What do you think it's about? Anybody have an idea about it? Because I'm going to tell you, it's probably not about what you've been told it's about. Most of the time when you hear this story, they talk about wrestling with God in prayer. That's what you'll hear the story of Jacob about. That in prayer you wrestle with God. Now, there's some truth to that reality. Paul talks about it in Colossians 4, Romans 15, this laboring in prayer on our behalf. So we're not just, arguing with the reality of working hard in prayer or laboring in prayer or, quote, wrestling with God in prayer. But if that's what's going on here, there's something really peculiar happening, because it says that this man who wrestled with Jacob did not prevail against him. Now, Jacob in a little while is going to say, I've wrestled with God and prevailed. Anything about that seem a little fishy? You're telling me that God showed up and Jacob wrestled with him and Jacob whipped God? That's kind of a bizarre. Are you answering over here? You are. I can hear you. Yeah. Oh, okay. Very good. See, I'm getting this echo. Yeah. Jacob wrestles with God and Jacob whips God? I mean, what in the world is going on here? And then that's supposed to be some sort of application to our prayer life, that you have God who is somehow unwilling to answer prayer or unwilling to bless unless you, quote, put him in a chokehold and say, all right, God, I'm going to wrestle you down and I'm not going to quit until you do what I say, and cry. I mean, look, that's going off a train track that just reeks with almost heresy, okay? Here's what's happening. You have this man who comes and wrestles with Jacob, and he wrestles until daybreak. The peculiar part is when it says that he did not prevail against him. And here's what I want you to process. What do you think it means when it says that this man who wrestled with Jacob did not prevail against Jacob? What do you think this means? Anybody got any idea? All right, come here, Zach. This will be fun. Yeah. So, Zach has always been super compliant. But if I take Zach and I put his arm behind his back, right? And I say, you tell everybody right now that you're a wimp, right? I didn't have to wrestle very hard. Now, if Zach were Jacob, and I'm wrestling with him, and I got his arm behind his back, and I'd be saying, tell everybody you're a wimp. And Jacob would be saying, tell them, come on, I'm not giving it, come on, say uncle, That's what we're talking about here. You have God, yeah. Give Zach a round of applause, right? Okay. Melody didn't clap, I'm just putting that out there. So, you have God wrestling with Jacob, wanting Jacob to submit to God. Jacob, you have got to break this self-reliant streak. You have got to let go of this mindset in you that says you can do it. Every time you come to me, you get so close, but then you run off and you make your own plan. And you figure it out on your own, how you're going to do it and how you're going to succeed and how you're going to win. Jacob, enough. You have got to quit. You need to yield. Give it up, Jacob, and trust me. Give it up, Jacob. Jacob, you have got to stop trying to do this on your own. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to quit. And the Bible says that when the man saw that he had not prevailed against Jacob, what did he do? Verse 25. He touched the socket of his thigh, and what was the result of that? He dislocated his leg, right? Jacob, you have got to relent. You are not strong enough to do this on your own. Give in. No. Give in. No. Give in. No. Fine. And he dislocated Jacob's leg. That's called brokenness. You can't do this on your own, Jacob. And Jacob has to become a cripple before he'll come to realize that. He has to be broken completely before he will learn that lesson. You have to be broken. You can't do this on your own. Now, Jacob has spent all night in defiance against God. I think many of us understand exactly when God says do and we say no, or God says don't and we say I'm gonna, and we argue and we fight with God. And eventually God reaches in and dislocates Jacob's hip, breaks his leg, so to speak. And notice now how the tables turn immediately. Look at verse 26. Somebody read that.
But he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me.
So that the man that's wrestling with Jacob breaks his leg in effect. I mean, dislocates it. So Jacob now is a cripple. He's going to limp the rest of his life. But Jacob has been resisting him all night. No, get off me, quit. No, I'm not going to do what you say. No. And then the man dislocates his leg. And now what's Jacob doing? He goes from trying to get away to what's he doing in verse 26? What does the man say to Jacob? Let me go. What's Jacob doing? Holding on. Do you see the difference? Jacob in his own strength is doing everything to throw this man off. Get off me, I got it. Get off me, I can fix it. I'm strong, I can do it. And then the man dislocates Jacob's hip, and now Jacob's what? You can't leave me, right? Isn't it amazing how quickly he became dependent? How quickly he realized, look, you can't cripple me and then leave me. You've got to bless me now. You've got to help me. I can't do this now. I'm crippled, I'm weak. I can't, and he won't let go. See how God changed Jacob's mind just like that? So he tells this man, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. You can't leave me out here. I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. And then something very important. Verse 27. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Anybody know why that's peculiar? Do you really think the man didn't know Jacob's name? That he just shows up and starts wrestling with people at random. It's like, I'm going to wrestle with this guy and dislocate hips, and I don't even know who it is. He knows who Jacob is. Why ask Jacob his name? What? Because Jacob doesn't know it? Jacob doesn't know his own name? No. I appreciate you trying, but ultimately in the end, you're wrong. Does anybody remember where that name Jacob came from? There you go. He's the one who grasped the heel, right? Because when Esau was born, remember, Jacob had a hold of his heel. Jacob also means the one who supplants. Jacob was a name given to him as a conniving, scheming, hard-working little turd. That's what Jacob was. and you're constantly conniving and scheming, and you're trying to do it all in your own strength, and you strive, and you have figured out in life how to do it yourself, how to outsmart, outwork, get ahead, you are a Jacob if I've ever seen one. That's your problem. Do you want to know why I've wrestled with you? Do you want to know why I had to dislocate your hip? Because you're a Jacob. And you always think you can do it. And you always think you can fix it. And you strive and you fight and you work. You're a Jacob. Now, verse 28. Now that you're a cripple, your name shall no longer be Jacob. You're not a Jacob anymore. Now you're who? Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Does anybody know what the word or the name Israel means? What? It does. Did you look that up or did you just know that? You listened to previous sermons and remembered? You're my new favorite child. Sorry, he remembered. You'll be back on top by bedtime. You know that. It'll be all right. Israel means he who strives with God. Or in Jacob's case, how about God strives? What you find now is this Jacob who's lived his whole life fighting and striving to get what he wanted. Now God has broken him. And now he's no longer called I fight. Now he's called you fight. Now it's not what I can do for myself. Now it's all about what you're going to do for me. I can't go out and fight. I can't go out and win. You're going to have to do it. And so just by asking his name, this one who wrestles with Jacob has revealed to him what your whole problem was, Jacob. You were self-reliant. You were strong. You could do it. You could figure it out. And God had to crush that, and God had to break that. But we're not done yet. Look at verse 29. Jacob asked him and said, well, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. Well, that's kind of peculiar, isn't it? Jacob said, well, I told you my name. Let's find out what your problems are. What's your name, right? Tell me your name. And what's the man say? No, I'm not telling you my name. You don't get to know my name. Have you ever seen that happen before? Does this ring a bell for you?
Sometimes.
It does not. Judges chapter 13, 18. Judges 13, 18. Be fast. Like a jungle cat. Judges 13, 18. What? You got it? Go for it.
But the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, saying it is wonderful?
Okay. This is in the book of Judges, and that's the parents of Samson, a man named Manoah. And the angel of the Lord comes to Manoah and tells him, you're going to have a son, he's going to be a Nazarene, and you all know the story of Samson, how he can't cut his hair and all that kind of stuff. And Manoah asked the angel of the Lord, what is your name? And the angel said, why do you ask my name? It is wonderful. My name is wonderful. And in the sense that it is beyond you. You could not comprehend it if I said it to you. And you go, his name is wonderful? Turn to Isaiah 9. And somebody read verse 6 of Isaiah 9.
So a child will be born to us, a son will be given us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, Eternal Father.
The very first name in the list. Wonderful. Do you know who Jacob wrestled with that night? You want to guess? He wrestled with Wonderful. Who is that? It's Jesus. This is what we call a Christophany in the Old Testament. It's a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. You see him from time to time in the Old Testament. He stands before Joshua at one time. He's the fourth man in the flame with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he shows up here to wrestle with Jacob. Jacob has just wrestled with Jesus. So here's the great question. What did Jesus do to Jacob? He dislocated his hip. He dislocated his leg. Why? To make him dependent on him. To break his self-reliance. Now, God obviously does not dislocate everyone's hip to teach them sanctification. But this is the point of what sanctification is. Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Penuel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore to this day the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh and the sinew of his hip. It becomes a perpetual reminder. I like to call this story the limp heard round the world, because it becomes a perpetual reminder to the children of Israel that before you are usable to God, God has to break all of your self-reliance and all of your pride. And listen, this is the easy application. You cannot be saved if you're trusting in yourself. You can't even be saved. You don't have enough ability. You don't have enough goodness. You cannot save yourself. There are not enough good works you can do. You couldn't do good works well enough. You can't do anything to save yourself. And if you're going to rely on even your best day, take the best 5 minutes of your life and say, all right, God, what if I just give you the best 5 minutes of my life? Even that is not enough for you to warrant your own salvation. You can't. The only way anyone ever gets saved is if they come, as Jesus said, and they are poor in spirit, and they are broken over their sin, and they mourn over what they've done, and they come to Jesus on their face and say, I'm a wretch. I can't do anything. It's too far gone for me. I'm lost. I've blown it. I've messed up. I'm too weak. I'm a cripple. I can't save myself. Please, would you save me? And that's the idea of salvation. When helpless sinners run to Christ, he saves the helpless, the brokenhearted, the afflicted, the poor, the lame, the crippled. That's who Jesus saves. That's not just salvation, though. You want to guess who Jesus uses in ministry? You want to guess the type of people that are acceptable to be used by him? The same kind. The broken. Question for you. Who do you think, if we're both, our biorhythms are really, rocking. If I'm on my game today. So if we're both on our game, and we're both firing on all cylinders, sharp as a tack, quick as a cat, just ready to go and just on our game, who do you think can accomplish more, me or Jesus? That's a good answer, Gage. You're right. Jesus every day, right? Jesus every day. Would I be better off ministering in my own strength or in his? His every day, right? What am I going to accomplish? How am I going to reach anybody? I can't. I can't speak to the dead. Jesus can. I can't heal. Jesus can. I can't convict. Jesus can. I can't even understand the mind of God. Jesus can. He's way better in everything. I have to be emptied of me before I am ready to be used by him. Does that make sense? You have to be broken or he won't use you. He can't use you. And he doesn't need you on your best day. We get this mentality sometimes in our life, if we can get the Tim Tebows, and I like Tim Tebow, or we can get, some other celebrity or somebody that was, how well they could serve God, and that's just not true. When Jesus came to this earth, he could have chosen Plato or Socrates or some of the great Greek philosophers. He could have chosen some of the Roman gladiators, some of the power warriors of the Roman Empire. He could have chosen some of the Pharisaical scribes or lawyers, the Bible experts of his day. But when Jesus went around, who did he choose? Fishermen, tax collectors. One of them was a terrorist, right? This is who he picks. Jesus picks the nothing. Why? Because that's who he uses. Anybody remember the story of the Apostle Paul? In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul says, I know a man who was caught up to heaven. He got to see glorious things that I can't even talk about. And I'd boast about such a man, but I can't boast about myself. But then he goes on to say that was me that went. And he said, but to basically humble me, there was given me, Paul says, a thorn in the flesh. It was there to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. And he said, 3 times I pleaded with God, please take this thorn out of my flesh. It would be like Jacob saying, please heal my leg. And God had an answer for Paul. Does anybody know what it was? Anybody know? 1,000 Bible points. You can't do anything with them, but it feels good to have them. And then you'll have to repent of pride. But God's answer to Paul was, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. Until you're weak, Paul, you will never be strong. Because you will rely on your own strength, and that's nothing. But it's not until you're weak that you will rely on my strength. And when you rely on my strength, now we're going to start accomplishing something. That's what God's doing to Jacob. That's what God did to Paul. It's what God does in some form or fashion to everyone he uses. He doesn't play with any toy until he breaks it first. This is the process of sanctification, where God begins to remove the me in me and replace it with him. Now, if you've yielded your life to Christ, that's the road you're on. That comes through repentance. That comes through humility. God uses trials in our life to do that. He's gracious. He's good. But he's doing that in our life. Our objective then is to rejoice and to see that God is doing in me what I wouldn't do in myself. He is using me for his purposes and for his glory. Jacob, self-reliant, Jacob becomes the father of the nation of Israel. His 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob will go down in history as the one God loved. Jacob I have loved, he says. Esau I hated. God has great affinity for Jacob, great love for Jacob, to bless him and prosper him and use him and bring a nation from him. But Jacob can't do that on his own, and until Jacob is rid of Jacob, he's not usable to God. Today, he graduates. Sanctification occurs in his life, and it comes through a dislocated leg, but God has sanctified the man. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, every way you can think, God has broken him. But now he's usable. This is the process of sanctification. Any questions or comments about Genesis 32? None? You all got it figured out? Okay, so if you're new here with us, we do here on Wednesday nights, we call it popcorn prayer. It means everybody prays, but nobody can pray more than one sentence. So we're actually going to start with Quincy, and we'll work our way down to Ariana and Damien and around to Jasmine, and we'll just weave our way around. So just one sentence, and then we'll dismiss. Go for it, Quincy.
Dear Lord, please help everyone that is traveling or somewhere that is not working well, and please help me with this.
Father, we thank you for the process of your sanctification. We do pray for grace as we walk through it. And Lord, we pray for your mercy, but we also pray for you to accomplish that purpose, that we may once again bear the image that we were intended to bear. We thank you for Jesus. It's in his name I pray. Amen. Well, we haven't even put them on the website. They're on our YouTube channel because FBC Spurs, what is it? Okay. So we don't usually post them again. They technically are there, but they're hard to find on the website.